On a quiet suburban street in Herndon, Virginia, a horrific discovery shattered the peaceful facade of the Banfield family home. What shocked investigators and the public alike wasn't just the murder itself, but the revelation of who had conspired to commit it. Authorities allege that Brendan and Juliana worked together to end Christine's life, their bond going far beyond what anyone had suspected. Friends, neighbors, and even family members were left asking the same chilling questions. How could two people so close to Christine betray her in such a calculated way? And why? The story took an even darker turn when details emerged about how the crime had unfolded. From an alleged attempt to stage a chaotic break-in to the immediate actions taken in the days following the murder, the case quickly grew more disturbing with every revelation. This wasn't just a story about a murder. It was about trust broken in the most profound way. A husband and a nanny, two people Christine should have been able to rely on the most, had seemingly turned against her. As the investigation progressed, it became clear this was no spur-of-the-moment act. It was premeditated, deliberate, and filled with chilling audacity. Christine's death was not just a tragedy but a window into a dark and twisted dynamic that would eventually leave a community horrified, a family shattered, and justice demanding its due. To the outside world, Christine and Brendan Banfield seemed to have it all: a picturesque family, a beautiful home, and a life many would envy. But beneath the surface of their carefully curated image, cracks in their marriage were widening. Those close to them later described the Banfields' relationship as strained, marked by arguments and growing distance. Christine, a dedicated mother and successful professional, was often described as the glue that held the family together. Her friends saw her as vibrant and resilient, committed to her children and determined to make things work despite the challenges she faced in her marriage. Brendan, however, painted a different picture. Some said he seemed detached, discontent, and preoccupied, traits that would come into sharper focus as investigators began digging into their lives. Adding another layer of complexity to the Banfields' household was the presence of Juliana Perez Magalhaes. At first glance, Juliana seemed like the ideal nanny. Young, attentive, and eager to make a life in the United States, she quickly became part of the family dynamic. Christine, who initially trusted Juliana, saw her as a solution to the demands of a busy life. However, Brendan's relationship with the nanny soon crossed professional boundaries, creating an atmosphere rife with suspicion and unease. Over time, Brendan and Juliana's closeness became difficult to ignore. Subtle glances, private conversations, and unexplained absences hinted at a connection that went beyond what was appropriate. Christine began to suspect something wasn't right, and those suspicions reportedly led to tension in the home. Friends would later recount how Christine expressed her unease about Juliana's growing presence in their lives. But even as Christine began to question what was happening, she couldn't have anticipated the dark turn her marriage and her home would take. Investigators would later allege that Brendan and Juliana's relationship wasn't just an affair. It was a toxic partnership fueled by ambition, resentment, and a shared desire to remove Christine from the picture entirely. The couple allegedly devised a chilling plan to murder Christine and create a new life together, one free from the constraints of a marriage Brendan no longer wanted. Christine was reportedly aware of the growing distance between her and Brendan. She tried to address it, focusing on her children and attempting to preserve the stability of their family. But Brendan's actions behind the scenes suggested he was already moving in a different direction. The very person Christine trusted to help care for her children, Juliana, was allegedly becoming an accomplice in a plot that would leave the family irreparably broken. As investigators later pieced together the events leading up to Christine's murder, they uncovered a series of text messages and phone records that painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Brendan and Juliana's communications suggested they had been plotting for weeks, if not months, meticulously planning how they would carry out the crime. It was this evidence that would ultimately reveal the depth of their betrayal and the lengths they were willing to go to secure a future without Christine. The unraveling of the Banfields' seemingly perfect marriage wasn't just a private tragedy. It became a public spectacle, a cautionary tale of trust betrayed and the devastating consequences of unchecked desires. As investigators dove deeper into the case, a chilling sequence of events began to emerge, exposing the calculated and deliberate nature of the crime. Brendan and Juliana's affair wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It became the foundation of a plan that defied comprehension. What started as an illicit relationship grew into a sinister partnership with one shared goal: the elimination of Christine. Evidence revealed that Brendan and Juliana's conversations turned from flirtation to plotting. In text messages recovered during the investigation, Brendan spoke of being trapped in his marriage and hinted at wanting a fresh start. Juliana, for her part, seemed willing to do whatever it took to solidify her place in Brendan's life. Detectives later described their exchanges as cold, methodical, and devoid of remorse. Messages that weren't about love, but rather about how to remove an obstacle standing in their way. Christine, completely unaware of the depth of the conspiracy against her, continued with her day-to-day life, focusing on her children and her career. However, those around her noted subtle signs of stress. She was reportedly growing more suspicious of Brendan and Juliana's relationship. Friends mentioned that Christine had confided in them, expressing doubts about Juliana's loyalty and Brendan's distant behavior. But even in her wildest imagination, she couldn't have foreseen the betrayal brewing right under her roof. The crime itself was as brutal as it was shocking. According to the prosecution, on the night of the murder, Brendan and Juliana executed their plan with chilling precision. Christine was ambushed in her own home, a place where she should have felt safest. Authorities believe that Brendan played a direct role in incapacitating Christine, while Juliana ensured that no detail was left unchecked. The violence was swift and decisive, leaving no chance for Christine to defend herself. What's even more chilling is what happened after the crime. Instead of fleeing the scene or showing remorse, Brendan and Juliana carried on as if nothing had happened. Juliana didn't leave the house. Instead, she moved in, taking over Christine's role in the family almost immediately. Neighbors and friends were baffled, but initially chalked it up to Brendan needing help during a tragic time. What they didn't know was that the tragedy was orchestrated by the very people now pretending to mourn. But the pair's confidence would prove to be their downfall. Detectives were already piecing together a timeline that didn't add up. Brendan's alibi was shaky at best, and Juliana's sudden and seamless transition into the household raised eyebrows. Suspicion turned to certainty when forensic evidence from the crime scene directly tied both Brendan and Juliana to the murder. DNA traces, digital footprints, and the damning text messages painted a clear picture of their involvement. The audacity of their actions didn't stop there. Investigators uncovered attempts by Brendan and Juliana to manipulate their surroundings. Financial records revealed that Brendan had begun moving assets and restructuring accounts in the weeks leading up to Christine's death. Juliana, meanwhile, appeared to have taken over Christine's responsibilities with startling ease, from managing the household to stepping into a parental role. As the evidence mounted, it became clear to law enforcement that this was no crime of passion. It was a premeditated, calculated act designed to eliminate Christine and allow Brendan and Juliana to live openly together. But their arrogance and carelessness in covering their tracks made it easier for detectives to build a compelling case. By the time Brendan and Juliana were arrested, the community was in shock. The narrative that had initially been presented, a grieving husband and a helpful nanny stepping in during a time of need, was turned on its head. Instead, the story that unfolded was one of betrayal, greed, and a chilling lack of humanity. When the arrests came, they were swift and decisive. Brendan and Juliana were apprehended simultaneously, their carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbling in an instant. For a community that had been mourning alongside Brendan, the news was as shocking as it was horrifying. The seemingly grieving widower and the supportive nanny were no longer figures of sympathy. They were the central figures in a calculated and brutal murder plot. The interrogation room became the setting for a high-stakes game. Brendan, a man who had always projected an air of control, quickly unraveled under the pressure of mounting evidence. Investigators presented the damning digital trail, text messages outlining the plan to murder Christine, financial records showing Brendan's attempts to secure assets, and forensic evidence placing both him and Juliana at the scene. It was an unassailable case, and Brendan knew it. His initial denials were quickly replaced with a different strategy: deflection. He painted Juliana as the mastermind, claiming that she had coerced him into the plan. According to Brendan, she had grown possessive and obsessive, pressuring him to choose between her and Christine. But detectives weren't buying it. The evidence told a different story. one where Brendan was just as complicit, if not the driving force behind the plot. Juliana's interrogation followed a similar trajectory. Unlike Brendan, she maintained a stoic demeanor, refusing to admit to any involvement. She insisted she was merely a supportive figure in the family's time of need, a claim that investigators swiftly dismantled. The text messages revealed her eagerness to carry out the plan, her words chilling in their simplicity and resolve. The forensic evidence, too, was impossible to dispute. Her DNA was found on Christine's belongings and in places that only the perpetrator could have been. As the legal proceedings began, the community's shock turned into outrage. How could two people, trusted to care for a family, conspire to destroy it so completely? The courtroom became a theater of revelations, each detail more horrifying than the last. Prosecutors laid out the timeline of the crime, showing how Brendan and Juliana had spent months planning every detail. They painted a picture of two people consumed by greed and desire, willing to do anything to achieve their twisted version of happiness. Witness testimony provided further insights into the dynamics of the household in the weeks leading up to Christine's murder. Friends of Christine described her growing unease, noting that she had started to question Juliana's motives and Brendan's loyalty. Former colleagues of Brendan recounted his uncharacteristic behavior, erratic absences, unusual financial inquiries, all signs that something was amiss. And neighbors, who had initially dismissed Juliana's sudden move into the home as an act of kindness, now recalled moments that seemed oddly calculated in hindsight. Perhaps the most damning moment came when the prosecution revealed a voice recording recovered from Brendan's phone. It captured a heated argument between him and Christine just days before her death. In it, Christine accused Brendan of lying, of hiding something from her. Her voice, trembling with frustration and hurt, contrasted sharply with Brendan's dismissive tone. The recording ended abruptly, but its implications were clear. Christine had been on the verge of uncovering the truth. As the trial continued, the defense attempted to shift blame between the two co-conspirators. Brendan's legal team argued that he had been manipulated by Juliana, portraying her as a calculating outsider who had wormed her way into the family. Juliana's attorneys, meanwhile, painted her as a victim of circumstance, claiming she had no motive to harm Christine without Brendan's influence. But the jury wasn't swayed by these arguments. The evidence was overwhelming, and the cold, calculated nature of the crime left little room for doubt. It became clear that this was not a crime of passion or desperation. It was premeditated and executed with chilling precision, a deliberate act of betrayal against a woman who had trusted both Brendan and Juliana. The trial reached its dramatic conclusion with both Brendan and Juliana found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge's words during sentencing captured the sentiment of everyone who had followed the case. This was a crime driven by greed and a shocking disregard for human life. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, their plan to live happily ever after now reduced to a lifetime of isolation and regret. But for the community, and especially for Christine's family, the wounds left by their actions would take far longer to heal. The image of the loving husband and the helpful nanny had been irrevocably shattered, replaced by the grim reality of a betrayal that defied comprehension. The courtroom verdict brought a measure of closure, but the scars left by Brendan and Juliana's actions would run deep, affecting everyone touched by the tragedy. Christine's family and friends, still reeling from the shock, found themselves grappling with a profound sense of betrayal. The woman they had known as a loving mother and dedicated professional had been taken in such a cruel and calculated manner. In the weeks following the sentencing, Christine's story became a touchstone for discussions about trust, deception, and the hidden dangers within relationships. Her friends and loved ones described her as vibrant, caring, and intuitive, a woman whose life was cut short just as she had begun to suspect the truth. They used their grief to fuel advocacy efforts, raising awareness about the warning signs of emotional manipulation and abuse. The community, too, struggled to process the revelations. Brendan and Juliana had seemed so ordinary, so unassuming. It was a stark reminder that even the most familiar faces could conceal unfathomable darkness. Neighborhood groups organized vigils in Christine's honor, transforming the horror of her death into a call for vigilance and solidarity. In the media, The case captured widespread attention, sparking debates about the nature of trust within families and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. Investigative reports delved into Brendan's financial struggles, uncovering a pattern of reckless decisions and desperation that likely motivated his actions. Juliana's background was also scrutinized, with questions raised about how a person entrusted with the care of a family could become entangled in such a heinous act. For Christine's 2 children, the fallout was immeasurable. Suddenly orphaned by the actions of those who were meant to care for them, they were placed in the custody of close family members. Their future became the focal point of community support, with neighbors and friends rallying to provide stability in the face of unimaginable loss. Meanwhile, Brendan and Juliana began their lives behind bars. The stark reality of their sentences stood in stark contrast to the life they had envisioned. The intricate plan they had crafted, driven by greed and desire, had led not to happiness, but to destruction and lifelong imprisonment. In interviews from prison, Brendan maintained that he had been manipulated, while Juliana refused to speak at all. Christine's legacy, however, extended beyond the courtroom and headlines. Her family established a foundation in her name, aimed at supporting victims of domestic violence and those facing betrayal within their own homes. They hoped to ensure that Christine's tragic end would serve as a catalyst for meaningful change, preventing others from suffering a similar fate. The story of Christine's murder remains a cautionary tale, a reminder of how deeply betrayal can cut and how critical it is to recognize signs of manipulation before they escalate into violence. Her life, though tragically shortened, inspired those who knew her to seek justice, advocate for the vulnerable, and honor her memory through action. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications as we bring you new stories daily. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.